So, we are now approaching the end of the Congress. We are about half an hour late, so we are aiming to finish at about 7. So, but we have about half an hour for questions to both keynote sessions. Just put your hand up if you have any questions, and someone will come to you with a microphone. Okay, who wants to ask a question to each of the keynote sessions? There's many people not here already, but Aldo here in the front has a question. There's a microphone, Aldo, coming. There's a.
I know some of the work by Trevarten, and it seems to me that instincts never stop being active. Would you agree? Instinctual drives, and the seeking, for example, instinct. If you agree with this, would it make sense to create a situation whereby you can activate the attachment instinct? Because what we find in the therapeutic community is that we create a situation whereby people, after a while, they feel attached again to the whole environment. And to do so, we utilize safety, trust, empathy, a lot of empathy, a lot of translations into words of feelings. So I would like to know more, if you could expand a little bit of your knowledge on this topic, of what you know, whether, because it seems to me that if you put it that way, I mean, put it the way that you put it, you need to give medication to some people. How did you deal with the woman who was confused about her identity with you? You know, anyway, is it complicated?
So there were about 5 questions. So
all right.
So are the instincts always active, I think you said. So I think the day that your seeking system stops working, your brain becomes a dark and empty thing. So the seeking system lights up the whole Christmas tree. It activates the entire, it's a bottom-up activation. And basically the cortex suppresses and the seeking system provides energy. Yes, if you don't have an active seeking system, the whole system doesn't function. So if we're alive, we have a seeking system that's working one way or the other. I think you were. So the relationship between Panksepp's affective command systems and Freud's drives, for example, there's a good question. For those people who try and make these translations, it seems that the seeking system is as close as you can get to Freud's description of libido, because it's an object-seeking drive which is blind to its object. It doesn't, from the seeking system's point of view, it doesn't matter if you're hungry, thirsty, want sex. It's all the same drive that drives you in the direction of all of them. So it just makes you go and find the thing in the external world that will satisfy your hunger, whatever your hunger is. So, and then there are different systems that come into place when it's the consummation of the desire is a different system. That's a more opiate thing. But the dopaminergic system makes you go and find the thing that will satisfy you. So it's probably the closest neurological thing that corresponds with what Freud talked about as libido. So then there's the death instinct, which I never got around to talking about. That's so disappointing, but never mind, that'll have to do for another day. So Yes. Then you were asking about whether or not there are any ways in which the neuroscience, the neurobiology, and the psychotherapy could augment one another. So what I was trying to talk about is some very preliminary ideas about that, which occasionally, where I've had to go and seek the advice of the trust pharmacist for permission to use some of these in extremis with some of our patients. So, but we're nowhere near a clinical trial of these things yet. But maybe this will come in the fullness of time. So I was talking about the possibility of using naloxone, the opiate antagonist, with some of the... So about 40 or 50% of people coming to the service have had their diagnostic tests for autistic spectrum disorder, and they are on the autistic spectrum. You could say that their capacity for relational engagement in our program is severely impaired, and there is a possibility we could have a trial of using naloxone to see if that made the therapy more effective. So that's one. Yoram Yovel, who is a professor in Israel, who also comes to the Neuropsychoanalysis Congresses, which is where I learned most of this stuff. He is doing a trial of buprenorphine, which is an opiate, for people who are suicidal. So the idea is that the thing that precipitates the suicidal behavior is the separation. Most of us who are psychotherapists know this. And for people who are at their most suicidal, rather than them dying because they take an overdose when you go on leave, they have low-dose buprenorphine sublingually for 3 weeks over the break. And it seems to be the most effective thing in suicide prevention of anything that's been tried in the suicide prevention work. So you just medicate down the pain of the separation distress a bit, and the patient doesn't kill themselves, and then they're there to fight another day with you when you get back. So that's another use of using medication to kind of improve the safety. That's another possibility. And then there's all of the ways that I've been trying to think about incorporating the thinking about substance misuse into the therapeutic, into the transference, thinking about the transference. There may be many, many others. So Panksepp is trying 3 new treatments, including deep brain stimulation for people who have chronic depression, whose seeking systems are switched off. So deep brain stimulation switches the seeking system on again, you stimulate it. Another one is using what's thought to be the neurotransmitter that is active in rough and tumble play, which promotes joy, the enjoyment of play. So he's saying we treat antidepressants by trying to get rid of the pain, and we need to promote the happiness, is his idea. So Glix, I can't even remember the name of it. It's a little neuropeptide that's involved in rough and tumble play. If you administer that to depressed patients, they start enjoying life again. These are treatments that who would have thought of it? We're still thinking about monoamines the whole time. So he's a great innovator in psychiatry. Yes, exactly. So we're providing in a relational context some of these biological ingredients for recovery, the natural way as opposed to the synthetic way.
Thank you.
I have one question here from Mario. Perhaps if there were 2 microphones, it would be better. Yeah?
I appreciate very much your talk. I'm also a member of the Neuroscientific Society, and I know very well Panksepp and Solms and Yovel. One of your things, this idea about anorexia, I didn't understand this idea when you use the model of the
claustrophobic.
And they are in the middle, using the 2 systems.
One foot in each camp.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little more?
Okay. There's an entire chapter coming up about this, but I'll try and do my best. Maybe the best way to illustrate it is with a clinical example. So this was the closest to a little therapeutic miracle of my entire psychotherapy career. I assure you this doesn't happen every day. But it illustrates something which got me thinking about this. So I run groups for junior doctors where they come and talk to me about their caseload, and they brought a case one day which was a young man who'd just been admitted in a catatonic state. So for those who don't know about catatonia, this is an akinetic mute state. So he'd just come to a stop, no talking, no movement, no nothing. And they told me about he was a young man who'd been brought up by his mother, and he was just coming up to the age of leaving home, and he just entered into this state, no previous mental history. So I decided I was going to, in a completely acting out kind of way, that I was fascinated by this. I wanted to go and see him, and he was on the ward next door. So the next day I went along, asked the permission of the nurses, went and sat by his bedside and just tried to think about my countertransference and to think about what this might be about. And what I observed was that this young man was like a babe in arms. The nurses had to toilet him. They had to, change his bed. They had to feed him. They had to do absolutely everything for him. He was like a tiny, tiny baby, looked at from the outside world point of view. But I thought, so how are you seeing it, patient, from your point of view? So, and I thought he's behaving as though he needs nothing from anybody. That he doesn't need food. He's completely autonomous. He doesn't need to take anything in. He needs nothing from the outside world. So I turned this into an interpretation. I said, so from my point of view, I'm looking at you, and I can see that you're like a baby in the arms of their mother, that you need total care. The words are not enough to look after you. You need action. You need somebody to do all these things for you. But I can see that from your point of view, you feel as though you need nothing from anybody, that you can provide everything for yourself, and you need nothing from me or the nurses or anyone else. You can do it all yourself. And I wonder if this is your solution to the problem of leaving home, because from the discussion from the doctors, I knew he was just on the brink of leaving home, that you feel that the only way you're going to manage to leave home is if you do it all for yourself and don't rely on your mother at all. So I just kind of made it up. To my stunned amazement, he sat up and he said to me, "Yes, that's right." It was amazing. And he told me that he'd been brought up by his mother, and he knew he relied on her too much, and he didn't know how he was ever going to leave home, and that he'd started a few months ago trying to grow his own food in the back garden, and he'd started refusing to eat his mother's food, and gradually he'd become more and more and more retreated into this state where he stopped eating and drinking. Anyway, it was so that I'd never done that. I'd never had an experience where one psychotherapeutic intervention would get somebody out of a state like that before, so I had to really think about it. So I thought that he's like the eating disorder patients. His body is saying, "Look after me," but in his internal world, he's saying, "I need nothing." So it's, in a way, the body is agoraphobic and the mind is claustrophobic. So there's come to be a divide between the internal world and the relational thing. So I could say a lot about how I think that happens in the mind and how that dissociation between the two comes about, but we've only got half an hour, so perhaps I better stop there. Perhaps that explains it a bit.
Yeah, Isaura. Yeah, one question. Isaura here.
Eu vou pôr a pergunta primeiro em português. Eu gostei muito de ambas as intervenções. A Susan falou um bocado depressa demais, foi pena. Mas gostava de pôr um problema aos dois, que é o problema do treino. O treino que é preciso ter, um treino sofisticado em psicoterapia, para se poder intervir não só numa comunidade terapêutica, mas neste momento em qualquer serviço que trate as doenças graves. Com a falta de dinheiro que há, qual é a posição deles em relação ao tipo de treino que se deve ter em saúde mental? Concretamente, o Rex hoje pôs um dos pontos importantes. One of the important points you you talked about was about training and how much sophisticated training in psychotherapy do you think that people who work in therapeutic communities should have? And I think that Susan talked also about the training and the importance of psychoanalytic training. I understood, perhaps you talked too quick for me, the training in psychoanalytic psychotherapy was essentially in supervision. I worked a lot in a day hospital with a psychoanalytic and group analytic framework, and I think that the more we have a sophisticated training, the more we can adapt to ourselves, to make different things, to innovate. Well, thank you both.
So, who wants to answer this for both? Yes?
Shall I say a few words? Yeah, thank you. I think my emphasis in the training is that what is not taught well is the experiential part of it. And I think for psychotherapy, there are three elements which are theoretical instruction, supervised clinical practice, and experiential. And I think Sharma said something very interesting in her talk about how the people who had been through the experiential training with her in India, many of them realized that they needed more therapeutic experience for themselves, to understand themselves. And I think in the modern systems that is not enough. There is not enough understanding of ourselves in the training that is required of psychiatrists, for example. I know Sue is making great efforts to improve these things through the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and to improve it for other professions through activities like reflective practice to understand our own emotional responses to the clinical material that we're involved in. But I think we run the risk of becoming too dry and technical and only scientific. That's only half of the story. I think we need both, and which is why I think this idea of the triangle, of bringing the three different sides together, is what this conference hopes to do. I mean, I've learnt some very interesting things this afternoon from Sue. Many years since I've heard about all those different parts of neuroanatomy, and I've got a few questions I could ask her as well if we run out here. But I think that the fundamental place I'm coming from is that the training, there's plenty of theory training, there's plenty of clinical experience to be done, but the experiential part of understanding the nature of therapeutic relationships, particularly in groups, and how powerful those can be to bring about change in people, is under-recognised by the systems certainly in England that we're in at the moment. I don't know what the training here is in Portugal, but that's one of the things I would say about training.
Just before Sue commenting, I'm not sure, I just want to add something. I'm very curious as well about the triangle and how in some therapeutic communities there is no use of medication at all for personality disorders. On the other hand, we see the combination of the two things in other services. So how can, I'm just adding something, how can these two work well? How can a therapeutic community without medication impact neurobiology and vice versa?
I'm not sure I have much to add to what Rex has said, apart from to agree. And we were talking about our slightly different points of view, and the fact that I tend to be more objective in my way of talking about things, and that Rex talks about the first-hand experience of these things, and I think one needs both in order to get to grips with it. So we have different ends of the triangle, but both are essential to each other, aren't they?
Yeah. Perhaps I'll give a slightly more direct answer to Joao's question, and that is what I say to patients in our therapeutic communities is that medications work, they are effective for symptoms, but they often do not help what is behind the symptoms, why you have the symptoms. And actually they can block the therapeutic work if they make people too drowsy, or if they make people artificially elevated in mood, or in different ways. So while they are safely contained in a therapeutic group and they feel that experience of connection to each other. They are in a safe place in order to explore their feelings without the necessity of medication in order to hold themselves together. And it's only when you have an intensive therapeutic program that it is safe to do that sort of thing. When people are held in a different way to being held by medication, it may be the only opportunity they get in their lives to try to do these things without the medication while they're in a program. And it doesn't work for everybody. But I think it is... I'm not denying that medication is effective, but I think it is certainly not the only thing that's needed, and sometimes it can get in the way of doing effective therapy.
We still have about 5 minutes. Any more questions?
There is. So
Can people hear in the back? Yeah. How is empathy conceptualized? Your question was, how is empathy
conceptualized? Como é que podemos conceptualizar a empatia? Eu julgava que também havia care system nestes sistemas básicos de comando emocional do Pancep.
So the care system, there are two that I didn't mention, care and lust. There are two that I didn't mention, care and lust. So there are 7 systems, I only talked about 5. There are 2 which are care and lust, which I didn't mention, and they're in a sense subcategories of the panic system. They're offshoots of the panic system, so they kind of come under the same category. Neurobiologically speaking, similar neurotransmitters, etc. What am I going to say about this? Just tell me the question again. Empathy. Okay. So oxytocin. If you remember, oxytocin was one of the 2 neurotransmitters in the panic system, of which the lust and care are a part. Oxytocin has been described as liquid trust, because when you give it to people, they develop more of a capacity to trust others. So the way that neurobiologists test these things is by doing games in which people do financial transactions with each other, and the amount that you're prepared to gamble on your partner's responses is a reflection of how much you trust them. So it's a way of externally observing the amount of trust that is going on in the relationship between the 2 people who are playing the game. So if you give people oxytocin, they are much more inclined to trust people and take risks on and when the other person lets them down, they're much more inclined to allow these things to allow a repair and to kind of carry on regardless of the fact that the person just threw away all the money they gambled on, etc. So oxytocin is the panic system neurotransmitter, and it promotes trust in normal subjects. If you do the same experiment with borderlines, you get a counterintuitive response, which is the borderlines divide themselves into 2 categories. I mean, firstly, across the board, borderlines find it much more difficult to recover from ruptures in their trust with other people. So once there's been a rupture, they don't so quickly get to trust people again. But secondly, depending on their attachment pattern, they will either become much more socially orientated when they have oxytocin, or they'll become socially aversive. And so to my mind, that endorses my 2 states of mind model, that there are some people for whom being close is a relief, and there are other people for whom being close is absolutely terrifying. And so they have a very aversive response to the increased empathy with oxytocin. So I think it's complicated.
We are really at the time of closing, so Is there any last burning question? Yes? Okay, final one.
Any suggestion for avoidant personality disorders?
Well, the important thing with people, so avoidant personalities are people who want to attribute, they want to treat their problem as if it belongs to somebody else, and they can get away from it if they just go away. That's the basis of avoidance as far as, so they're on the right, they're red state of mind people, they're attributors. So the thing that usually happens with avoidant people is everybody says, come on, you need to look at this. But then you're just doing the being demanding thing. So they feel like, yeah, it is just you who wants it, it's nothing to do with me. So one has to have a different, you can't chase. You have to have a way of talking about their difficulty engaging with the problem that doesn't chase. So there's a technique which I'm trying to master. It's hard work.
It goes along with our experience in community. We get time.
Yes. So sometimes sending them away is the thing to do, because then they have time to think about the fact that actually they want to sort it out, and then they come back. Yes.
Okay, it was a long day. I'd like to thank everyone for staying until so late. I also want to remind people there is a social dinner tonight, so if you haven't registered, we still have some spaces, so come and not a lot of spaces, but we still have a few spaces, so come and meet with some of the organization people over there. For the ones that are going to the dinner, there is a bus going out at 8 o'clock from the main square. The dinner is at Adega Vila Santa, João Portugal Ramos. Okay, tomorrow we start at 9 o'clock here, so thank you very much again, and see you later or tomorrow. Thank you.